In the 1820s in New England, times were changing. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Samuel Slater emigrated from England in 1789. In 1790, he built his first mill on the banks of the Blackstone River in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Referred to as the father of the Industrial Revolution, by the early 19th century, his methods were being replicated in mills all across New England. Following the success of Samuel Slater, Francis Cabot Lowell and a group of his associates, known as the Boston Associates, built a textile mill on the Charles River in Waltham, Massachusetts. He created a controlled system of labor, recruiting young farm girls to work in the mill. Although the mill was profitable, the Charles River did not produce enough power for long-term success. Francis Cabot Lowell died in 1817. The Boston Associates looked northwards to find a better location for their operation. They found their answer in East Chelmsford, Massachusetts, 25 miles northwest of Boston. The Pawtucket Falls stretch of the Merrimack River would give the new mills plenty of water power. After buying up the land they needed from local farmers, the Associates built the first mill in their new location. The town of Lowell, named after Francis Cabot Lowell, was incorporated in 1826, 3 years after the first mill opened. Referred to as the City of Spindles, Lowell would soon find itself the center of the Industrial Revolution. The early 19th century saw a changing New England economy. The building of better roads, the building of canals and then railroads meant that goods could be better moved between towns and cities. Household goods previously made by hand could now be bought at stores. Women who previously did this handwork at home were now becoming unneeded. For the Boston Associates, this was a perfect opportunity. Most men worked on family farms and could not be enticed to come to the city and work in the mills for wages low enough for the mills to be profitable. The Associates started to recruit young women, some as young as 13, to come and work in the mills. For a young unmarried woman, it was an opportunity for them to gain their financial freedom. Although paid half of what a man made, the pay was more than any other job that a woman could do at the time. The Lowell owners created what would be known as the Lowell system. They hoped to create a new factory system, different than that of in England, where children entered the factories at a young age and never left, working under atrocious conditions and never escaping poverty. The young women that worked in the Lowell mills were housed in boarding houses built by the mill owners. They were promised to be provided educational and cultural opportunities. They believed that by providing a better working environment, they could ensure a steady supply of reliable labor. At first, the Lowell system seemed to challenge the assumptions of female inferiority and dependence on men. But factory life for the Lowell girls would soon become oppressive. By the end of the 1830s, there were almost 10,000 textile mill workers in the city of Lowell, 75% of which were women. The conditions in the mills were severe by today's standards. The girls worked from 5 a.m. until 7 p.m. The noise, according to one worker, was something frightful and infernal. The air in the textile mills was full of lint particles which were impossible not to breathe in. The mills were cold and drafty in the winter and hot and humid in the summer. The factories built hundreds of boarding houses. The houses held up to 25 girls with up to 6 sharing a single bedroom. One worker described her living quarters as
a small, comfortless, half-ventilated apartment containing some half-dozen occupants.
The mill owners publicized what they referred to as the literary mill girls and their desire to learn and educate themselves. But in reality, for most girls, it wasn't as easy as they made it sound. As one operative wrote,
Who, after 13 hours of steady application to monotonous work, can sit down and apply her mind to deep and long continued thought? Where is the opportunity for mental improvement?
Another girl wrote a similar view.
After one has worked for 10 to 14 hours at manual labor, it is impossible to study history, philosophy, or science. I will remember the chagrin I often felt when attending lectures to find myself unable to keep awake.
In 1834, the board of directors of the mills proposed to cut the workers' wages by 15% due to an economic depression. After holding meetings, approximately 800 workers organized a strike. The feeling of the workers' views was summed up in a flyer that was printed and handed out with the title, "Union is Power."
Union is power. Our present object is to have union and exertion, and we remain in possession of our own unquestionable rights. We circulate this paper wishing to obtain the names of all who imbibe the spirit of our patriotic ancestors, who preferred privation to bondage, and parted with all that renders life desirable, and even life itself, to produce independence for their children. The oppressing hand of avarice would enslave us, and to gain their object, they very gravely tell us of the pressure of the times. This we are already sensible and deplore it. All who patronize this effort, we wish to have discontinue their labor until terms of reconciliation are made. Resolve that we will not go back into the mills to work unless our wages are continued as they have been. Resolve that none of us will go back unless what they receive is all as one. Resolve that if any have not money enough to carry them home, that they shall be supplied. Let oppression shrug her shoulders.
The strike failed, and after a few days, most workers had returned to their jobs at the new lower wage. The fact that the women would strike at all shocked the mill owners. The owners saw themselves as benevolent fathers to the girls and saw the strike as not only unfeminine but also ungrateful. William Austin of the Lawrence Company referred to the strike as an Amazonian display. In 1836, the mill owners proposed a rent hike in the boarding houses. The workers again banded together. They formed the Factory Girls Association. The workers organized a second strike. In October 1836, the girls shut down their machines and walked out of the factory.
The mills were shut down and the girls went in procession to the Grove on Chapel Hill and listened to incendiary speeches. One of the girls stood on a pump and gave vent to the feelings of her companions in a neat speech, declaring that it was their duty to resist all attempts at cutting down the wages. This was the first time a woman had spoken in public in Lowell, and the event caused surprise and consternation among her audience. Harriet Robertson.
The strike of 1836 attracted twice as many workers as the strike of 1834.
It was estimated that as many as 12 or 1,500 girls turned out and walked in procession through the streets. They had neither flags nor music, but sang songs, a favorite one being a parody on "I Won't Be a Nun." Harriet Robinson. Oh, isn't it a pity such a pretty girl as I should be sent to the factory to pine away and die? Oh, I cannot be a slave, I will not be a slave, for I'm so fond of liberty that I cannot be a slave.
This time, the strike lasted for weeks and caused the mills to run below capacity. This time, the owners relented and rescinded the rent hikes.
As I looked back at the long line that followed me, I was more proud than I have ever been since any success I may have achieved, and more proud than I shall ever be again until my own beloved state gives its women the right of suffrage. Harriet Robertson.
After the strike of 1836, there were more wage cuts. Due to the continued economic depression, these cuts were met with no labor action. By the mid-1840s, with the economy recovered and the mills again making profits, the workers' goals turned political. The fact that the women who worked in the mills spent so much time together, living and working long hours together in tight quarters, gave them a sense of community that other workers may not have felt. In 1844, they formed the first female labor union in the United States, the Lowell Female Labor Reform Association. Led by Sarah Bagley, the association started with 12 members and within 6 months had grown to over 500 workers. It was completely run by women, who elected officers, ran meetings, and started branches in other mill towns. In 1845 and 1846, petitions signed by 2,000 and 5,000 workers were sent to the Massachusetts General Court demanding that they pass a law for a 10-hour workday. The Massachusetts legislature formed a committee chaired by Representative William Schouler to investigate and hold public hearings. These were the first investigations into labor conditions by a governmental body in the United States. The committee ultimately determined that it was not the state legislature's responsibility to control the hours of work. The Lowell Female Labor Reform Association worked to unseat William Schouler in his next campaign for the state legislature. Schouler lost but was re-elected the following year. The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, was still 75 years away, and with no power to vote, their ability to influence elections was very limited. The Lowell Female Labor Reform Association continued to work for better conditions with limited success, although their work carried over into other mill towns. In 1847, neighboring New Hampshire became the first state to pass a 10-hour workday law. The Lowell Female Labor Reform Association officially disbanded in 1848, although workers continued to push for reform. The Lowell Mills finally reduced the workday to 11 hours in 1853. What did the Lowell Mill Girls mean to the labor movement in America, and more specifically, to the women's labor movement? The answer is not a simple one. The strikes in Lowell are not so much important because they failed or succeeded, but because they happened at all. Their story is not so basic as workers striking to gain higher wages or better conditions. The story of the Lowell Mill Girls is about a group of women who used the strikes and organization to fight to change the accepted attitudes and boundaries of the time. The mills provided the girls unprecedented opportunity to work outside the home and gain some financial freedom, while at the same time exploiting them. The Lowell Mill Girls never accepted their status as social unequals or the paternalism of the male managers and owners at the mills. They were the cornerstone that would be added to by newly freed slaves who, working as laundresses, would strike in Jackson, Mississippi in 1866, and by female shoe stitchers who would form the first national female labor union in 1869, and by Mother Jones, who would fight tirelessly for miners in the early 20th century, all the way up to the women who continue to fight for women's rights today, both in the United States and around the world.